The sound was a beautiful, synchronous hiss. The sound of 100 powerful, automated sprinkler heads popping up from the ground in perfect, synchronized unison. It was 4 o'clock on a hot, late summer afternoon in the Viridian Meadows Estates, and the community's legendary and very expensive irrigation system was beginning its evening watering cycle. And then came the smell. It was a foul, gag-inducing stench of decay, of wet, rotting vegetation, and something else. Something sour and vaguely chemical. And then came the water. But it wasn't water. Not the crystal clear, pristine water that the residents of this multi-million-dollar community paid a fortune for. It was a thick, brown, chunky, and utterly disgusting sludge. A foul slurry of decomposing grass, algae, and God knows what else erupted from every sprinkler head, coating the perfect, emerald green lawns in a layer of stinking brown slime. It splattered across the gleaming white siding of the massive houses. It speckled the hoods of the expensive foreign cars parked in the driveways, and it rained down upon the residents themselves, who were out for their afternoon strolls. I watched it all from the quiet of my back porch, 100 yards across the lake, a cup of hot tea in my hand. I watched as the screaming started. I watched as the panic set in, and my eyes found her. Brenda, the president of the Homeowners Association. She was standing on her own, now swampy lawn, her face a mask of pure, apocalyptic horror as her prize-winning snow-white roses were being drenched in a shower of putrid brown filth. She had started this war. She had desecrated my sanctuary. And now I was just returning her property to her, one disgusting, pulverized drop at a time. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of beautiful hydrological justice, you have to understand my family's history with this land, the secret that lay at the bottom of my lake. My name is Sam. I was a farmer for most of my life, and then an agricultural engineer. I understand water. I understand soil. I understand the quiet, powerful, and often invisible systems that connect them. My family's homestead, a simple, sturdy farmhouse on 100 acres of rolling hills and forest, has been here for over a century. The heart of our property, the jewel of our family's legacy, is a magnificent 20-acre, spring-fed private lake. It's a place of profound peace and beauty, a thriving, natural ecosystem that my grandfather taught me to cherish and protect. But time and the city began to encroach. Years ago, my grandfather, a shrewd and practical man, made a deal. He sold the 80 acres of pasture land that surrounded our lake to a developer. But he was clever. He kept the 20 acres with the house, and of course, the lake itself. And as a gesture of goodwill to the new community that was being built, a community to be called Viridian Meadows, he granted them a single, crucial easement. The new development, with its massive houses and its obsessive focus on perfect, unnaturally green landscaping, would require a massive amount of water for irrigation. My grandfather granted them the right to draw that water from our lake. He even helped them design the system. A small, unobtrusive pump house was built on the edge of my property. A long, heavy intake pipe was run from that pump house out into the deep, clean, cold center of my lake. The pump house and the valves that controlled the entire system remained on my property. And, crucially, I retained the right to manage and maintain that system to ensure the long-term health of the lake for years. The arrangement worked perfectly. I had my peace, and they had their water, and then Brenda was elected president of the HOA. Brenda was a woman who seemed to be at war with anything that was authentic, natural, or not subject to her absolute control. She was obsessed with winning the Regional Community of the Year award, a prize judged almost entirely on the perfection of a community's landscaping. And my quiet, unassuming, and very natural way of life was, in her eyes, a direct threat to her ambition. Her welcome to me after she took office was a series of condescending suggestions delivered during one of her self-important patrols around the lake in her golf cart. "Sam," she'd said, her eyes scanning the beautiful, natural, and slightly wild shoreline of my property with open disdain. "We, the board, feel that your shoreline is not in keeping with the cohesive, manicured aesthetic of Viridian Meadows. The cattails are messy. The rocks are unsightly. It all looks so wild. We would be happy to provide you with the name of our approved landscaping architect. A nice, clean retaining wall and some imported white sand would do wonders for the view. I like it wild. Brenda, I'd replied, my voice tight, it's a natural habitat for the fish and the birds. It's supposed to be this way. She gave me a pitying look, as if I were a clueless child. Well, she'd sniffed. It's a shame. You're dragging down the whole aesthetic of the lake. Her obsession with my property soon focused on my greatest passion, fishing. I'm a lifelong fisherman. It's my meditation, my connection to the land, and to the memory of my father. My favorite spot was a small, quiet, secluded cove on my side of the lake. A place where the big bass loved to hide in the shade of an old fallen tree. That cove, and my simple, quiet hobby, became the focus of Brenda's tyrannical rage. The first notice arrived. Even though I was not a member of her HOA, it was a formal violation for my unattended and derelict fishing equipment, which was my one single, neatly stored aluminum rowboat, pulled up on my own shore. It was an eyesore, she claimed. I sent a polite letter back, reminding her that my property was not in her jurisdiction. Her response was to have her board pass a new, ridiculous rule, clearly and transparently aimed directly at me. All fishing-related activities, the new bylaw read, including, but not limited to, the casting of lines, the cleaning of fish, and the visible storage of any and all watercraft, are strictly prohibited within the visual sightline of any HOA property. She was trying to stop me from fishing on my own lake. I, of course, ignored her, and the harassment escalated. One morning, I went down to my fishing spot to find my beloved old rowboat had been vandalized. Someone had filled it with mud and thick, stinking lake weeds, had used a knife to slash the inflatable pontoons I used for stability. I had no proof, but I knew with a deep, sick certainty who was behind it. The anger was building. This was no longer just a power trip. This was a direct personal attack on something I loved. That day, I installed a series of high-definition, motion-activated security cameras, hidden in the trees covering every inch of my property, with a special focus on my little fishing cove. And then, she made her final, fatal, and unforgivable move. I had to go away for the weekend for a family wedding. I came home late on Sunday night. The next morning, I went down to the lake with my morning coffee, and was greeted by a sight of such profound, ugly desecration that it took my breath away. My beautiful, pristine, and quiet little fishing cove had been turned into a garbage dump. The HOA's landscaping crew, which was, of course, run by Brenda's brother-in-law, had, under her direct and explicit orders, dumped an entire season's worth of the community's yard waste directly into my cove. Piles of rotting grass clippings, huge mounds of pruned branches and thorny rosebush clippings. They'd even thrown in old broken patio furniture and bags of what looked like chemical fertilizer. The water was a thick, brown, stinking soup. The smell was unbearable. My sanctuary, the place I went to find peace, had been turned into a festering open sewer. It felt like a total, crushing defeat. It was a desecration, a physical blow that left me feeling sick and powerless. She had won. She had destroyed my peace. She had spat on my heritage, but my security cameras, my silent, patient sentinels, not been sleeping. That night, my grief and my rage turned into a cold, calculated, and deeply satisfying plan. I sat in my office, and I watched the footage. It was a masterpiece of damning, irrefutable evidence. The video showed the massive HOA dump trucks backing up to my shoreline. It showed the crew laughing as they tilted their beds and sent an avalanche of filth cascading into my pristine water. And, most beautifully, it showed Brenda, standing there, her arms crossed, a triumphant smile on her face, directing the entire criminal operation. I had her. I had her dead to rights. I had undeniable proof of a major criminal act of illegal dumping. of vandalism, of environmental pollution, and in that moment, a plan began to form in my mind. A beautiful, terrible, and perfectly, poetically just plan. I didn't call the police. Not yet. She had used my lake as her personal trash can. It was time to return the favor. She was so proud of her community's perfect green lawns. It was time for their regularly scheduled watering. I walked down to the small, unobtrusive pump house on the edge of my property. The pump house that contained the valves and the machinery for the entire Viridian Meadows irrigation system. I unlocked the heavy steel door and went inside. On the wall was a schematic of the system, a system my grandfather had helped design. I knew it like the back of my hand. I saw the main valve, the one that controlled the intake pipe that drew clear water from the deep center of the lake. And I saw the secondary valve, the one for the auxiliary intake hose. A feature my grandfather had installed for emergency situations. A hose that hadn't been used in 30 years. I put a heavy wrench on the main valve, and with a deep, groaning sound of metal, I closed it. The flow of clean water to their system was now cut off. Then, I uncoiled the heavy, 100-foot-long auxiliary intake hose. I spent the next hour dragging that heavy, rigid hose from the pump house across my property and into the now disgusting, trash-filled, decomposing sludge of my fishing cove. I secured the weighted intake nozzle to the bottom of the lake, right in the middle of the thickest, chunkiest, most foul-smelling part of the filth. I went back to the pump house, and with a final, satisfying turn of the wrench, I opened the auxiliary valve, their entire, powerful, community-wide irrigation system was now drawing its water directly from Brenda's personal garbage dump. I then went back to my house. I checked the HOA's website. I knew their automated, community-wide sprinkler system was scheduled to turn on at 4 p.m. for the premium evening watering cycle. I sat on my back porch. I made a fresh pot of tea. And I waited, and that brings us back to that moment. The moment the sprinklers came on, the moment the sky began to rain down a foul, brown, stinking slurry of their own, cycled filth. The community was thrown into a state of absolute, glorious, and hysterical chaos. People were running from the brown rain, screaming. The smell was unbearable. It was a complete and utter catastrophe. Brenda was having a full public and deeply satisfying meltdown on her now swampy, stinking lawn. Of course, she realized what I had done. She came storming to my property line, her face a mask of purple, sputtering rage. Expensive white clothes now splattered with brown sludge. She was screaming threats. She was screaming that she was calling the police. "Go ahead, Brenda," I had called back, my voice calm and clear. "I think that's an excellent idea." The sheriff, when he arrived, was not happy. He was met with a scene of mass hysteria, a community that smelled like a backed-up sewer, and a very angry, very wet HOA president. She, of course, accused me of everything: sabotage, vandalism, biochemical warfare. I just calmly met the sheriff at my gate, and I showed him the evidence. First, I showed him the high-definition, crystal-clear video of Brenda and her crew, illegally and criminally, dumping tons of waste into my private lake, and then I showed him the original, notarized irrigation easement agreement my grandfather had signed with the developer 30 years ago. I pointed out the specific clause, the one my grandfather, the wise old farmer, had insisted on. It clearly stated that the property owner, me, had the absolute right to manage and maintain the irrigation intake system as is necessary to ensure its proper and safe function, and to protect the primary water body from contamination or damage. I explained the situation to the sheriff in the calm, measured tones of a professional engineer. "Officer," I said, with a look of deep, sincere concern on my face, "as you can see from this video, the HOA, under Ms. Johnson's direction, created a massive and potentially hazardous debris field in my lake, right next to their primary irrigation intake. I was deeply concerned that this large debris, the branches, the furniture, the bags of unknown chemicals, could get sucked into the system and cause catastrophic damage to their very expensive pump and sprinkler heads. So, as was my right and my duty under this agreement, I took immediate emergency action. I temporarily switched the system to its secondary auxiliary intake in a different part of the lake to prevent any damage. I was just maintaining the equipment. I had no idea the water in that part of the lake was so dirty. I am just as shocked as they are. The sheriff looked at the video. He looked at the easement. He looked at me, the picture of a concerned, responsible property owner. And then he looked over at Brenda, the woman who had just been caught on video, committing a major environmental crime. He understood. He understood completely. Brenda was arrested. Right there, on her slimy, stinking lawn. For illegal dumping, for conspiracy, for felony vandalism. Her entire board of directors was named as co-conspirators. The State Environmental Protection Agency, when they were notified, launched their own massive investigation, and the fines they levied against the HOA were crippling. The HOA, of course, was ruined. They were facing a massive lawsuit from me, and a furious and very expensive class action lawsuit from their own residents for the now catastrophic damage to their lawns, their homes, and their property values. This whole brutal, ugly, and ultimately triumphant war taught me a profound lesson about the simple, beautiful logic of cause and effect. A lesson I had learned as a boy on my father's farm. Brenda, in her arrogance, thought she could treat my part of the world like her own personal garbage dump without any consequences. She failed to understand a simple, fundamental law of nature and of plumbing. What you put in one end of the pipe will always come out the other. The new, humbled, and nearly bankrupt HOA board paid a massive six-figure settlement to me, which included the full cost of a professional ecological cleanup of my beautiful fishing cove. But the new HOA president is a retired chemical engineer, and he's just sent me a formal, registered letter requesting a full chemical and particulate analysis report of my entire lake, claiming it may not be up to the quality standards required by their new and very delicate high-efficiency sprinkler heads.